I sued my mother and her friend for $18,000 because they crossed certain boundaries and didn't respect me. For a long time, I thought I had it pretty good. I was living with my mom in a small house on the edge of town, not glamorous or anything, but it was stable. I'm Tyler, 26, and I've been working as a freelancer for the past few years. Mostly video editing gigs, occasional live streaming when time and Wi-Fi allow, plus the odd commission from local businesses that need short promotional content or podcast editing. It's not always consistent, but I was doing okay. I paid $650 a month in rent, plus I covered about 60% of the utilities, which honestly felt fair since I was using more electricity with all the gear in my room. That's where most of my life happened, my room. It wasn't big, but over the years, I turned it into a full-fledged studio. We're talking multiple monitors, a high-end PC tower I built myself, a Shure SM7B mic on a boom arm, proper lighting setups with softboxes and RGB panels, soundproof foam on the walls, and even blackout curtains to help control lighting for filming. I'd poured thousands of dollars into it, collecting piece by piece over the years. That room wasn't just a place I slept in. It was my workplace, my studio, my zone. Living with my mom wasn't some failure thing. It worked. She got company, help with bills, and I got a roof over my head while saving up. That was the whole point. I was trying to save for a down payment on a condo. Nothing huge, just something that'd be mine. I'd been chipping away at it slowly but steadily. Even had a folder labeled First Place Fund with a few thousand in it. Things were routine. I had my space, I cooked my own meals, did my own laundry, minded my business. I helped mom with groceries sometimes, fixed the porch light when it went out, and even shoveled the walkway in winter without her having to ask. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. I didn't party. I wasn't out there wasting money or causing drama. I worked long hours in that room. Some weeks 50, 60 hours editing footage, rendering animations, dealing with dumb revisions from clients who couldn't make up their minds. But I didn't mind, because every bit of it meant I was one step closer to being on my own. There were times I thought about moving out sooner, just getting a cheap apartment with roommates, but I kept holding back. It made more sense financially to stay put a little longer, build my portfolio, and put serious money into savings. Plus, I didn't want to give up the studio I'd built. Starting over somewhere else would have meant downsizing, downgrading even. I had everything dialed in just the way I wanted. Mom and I didn't have the kind of relationship where we sat and talked for hours or hugged all the time. We weren't that close, but we got along. She knew what I did, kind of. She didn't understand the details, but she knew it was legal and kept me afloat. Sometimes she'd ask me to show her a video I'd edited or joke that she should start a YouTube channel and have me edit it. Harmless stuff. So when I say the rug got pulled out from under me, I mean it. And no, I'm not going to end this with some lesson about finding yourself or resilience. This is just what happened. About a month after everything had finally settled into a manageable rhythm, my mom told me over dinner that her friend Brenda was going through a rough patch and needed a place to stay. She was recently divorced, apparently got the short end of the stick in court, and was trying to get back on her feet. My mom had that voice she uses when she's already made up her mind but wants it to sound like a discussion. Just for a little while, she said, until she figures things out. I didn't love the idea, but I wasn't heartless. Brenda had 2 kids, both under 10, and I figured they'd stay in the guest room. I mean, it's not like I owned the place, and I didn't want to come off like some greedy tenant guarding every square foot. I nodded and told her it was fine, as long as it was temporary. That word came up a lot. Temporary. Short term. Just until she gets her footing. They moved in the following Saturday. I helped carry in some boxes, small things mostly, a couple suitcases, some toy bins. Brenda was friendly enough, kept thanking me for being understanding. Her kids were polite at first. One of them, the younger boy, clung to a stuffed tiger and barely said a word. The older one asked me if I was a YouTuber when he saw my setup. I just said I worked with videos and tried to leave it at that. The first week wasn't bad. A little louder in the mornings, sure, and it took me a few days to adjust to the sounds of kids running down the hall. But I could still work. I wore noise-canceling headphones when I edited and timed most of my streaming sessions for the evenings after dinner, once things had quieted down. Brenda cooked for all of us a few times, and honestly, it was nice not having to worry about meals for a change. Mom seemed happier, like she had some energy back with her friend around. I didn't want to mess that up. There were small inconveniences, of course. The bathroom line got longer. The laundry room was always occupied. Sometimes I'd find my almond milk gone or one of my protein bars missing, but I chalked it up to honest mistakes. Nothing worth raising hell over. What bothered me more than the noise or the food or the bathroom delays was how fast things shifted from temporary guest to new normal. It had only been 2 weeks, and already Brenda was referring to the house like she lived there full time. I overheard her on the phone saying, "Yeah, we're staying with Karen for a while. It's been great. The boys have their own space, and I've even been thinking about local schools. That gave me pause. I brought it up to my mom that night. We were both in the kitchen cleaning up after dinner, and I casually asked if Brenda had said anything about moving out. Mom rinsed a plate and shrugged like it wasn't even something she had considered. She's still figuring things out. You know, getting some things in order first. Right? I said, trying not to sound confrontational. It's just, you said it was going to be temporary. It is, she replied, a little sharper than I expected. But it's not like it's hurting anyone. Are they bothering you that much? No, I said honestly. Not yet. I just want to make sure it's still what we agreed on. She didn't respond, just turned the water off and left the room. I let it go for the moment. Even though my gut told me this wasn't going to be the kind of temporary that ends when someone's lease starts. It was starting to feel more like an arrangement with no clear expiration date. But for the time being, I kept my head down, kept working, and tried not to think too hard about it. After all, it was still early. Temporary, right? I came home one evening after running a few errands and grabbing groceries. Just the usual trip to Trader Joe's and the gas station. As I unlocked the front door, I noticed right away that something felt off. It was too quiet, but not the good kind of quiet. The kind that makes your skin itch, like the air's been disturbed in all the wrong ways. I walked down the hallway toward my room, juggling my keys and a grocery bag, and that's when I saw it. My bedroom door was wide open. I never leave it open. Ever. When I stepped inside, it was like walking into a crime scene. My desk chair was pushed to the side, and my streaming light panel was lying on its side near the closet. The mic stand had collapsed, and the microphone itself, my Shure SM7B that I spent months saving for, was hanging by its XLR cable, the mount snapped in half. One of Brenda's kids was sitting at my PC clicking around like he was trying to launch a rocket, while the other had a juice box half crushed on my editing keyboard. My headphones, which I kept wrapped and stored carefully on a hook above the monitor, were tangled in what looked like someone's half-eaten string cheese. I just froze. The words caught in my throat. I felt my stomach drop, like I had just missed a step walking down the stairs in the dark. What the hell? I said, loud enough that both kids jumped. One of them bolted straight out of the room. The other tried to play it cool, said something about playing Minecraft, and that Mom said it was okay. I wasn't even sure who I was more furious with at that point, the kids for wrecking my setup or my mom for letting this happen. I turned around and found her standing at the end of the hall like she'd been waiting to explain this all away. They just needed a little more space, she said, arms crossed like she was already defensive. It's not permanent. Just while Brenda figures out a few things. I stared at her like she'd grown a second head. This is my room. I pay rent for this room. I work in this room. She sighed like I was being dramatic. Don't start. You're being unreasonable. It's not forever. You can work from the kitchen table for now. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The kitchen table? With a broken mic, tangled cords, kids running around screaming and spilling snacks on everything? I walked back into my room and looked at the damage again. The soft foam padding on the wall was peeling. One of the ring lights had its diffuser cracked, and my mouse pad was soaked with what I could only assume was apple juice. My main camera was unplugged and sitting precariously on the corner of the desk, lens cap missing. It wasn't just about the equipment, although that alone represented years of work and savings. It was the invasion. The complete disregard for my space, for the time I'd put into building something that actually worked for me. This wasn't a spare room. It was mine. My money, my effort, my livelihood. I'm not okay with this, I said finally, my voice low but steady. I want my room back. This was not the deal. They're just kids, Tyler, my mom said, exasperated. They don't mean any harm. I shook my head. It's not about harm. It's about respect. I pay to live here. This room isn't a playroom. It's my job. She didn't say anything after that. Just gave me a look that said I was making things harder than they had to be and walked off. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the chaos in what used to be the most stable part of my life. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like I lived at home. I felt like a guest. A guest in a house I was helping pay for. A guest in a room that was no longer mine. The next morning, I tried to approach the situation with a clear head. I barely slept the night before, lying awake on the couch with a blanket that didn't even cover my legs, staring at the ceiling and trying to figure out what the hell just happened. I told myself maybe it was a misunderstanding. Maybe in the light of day things would make more sense. Maybe my mom would realize she'd crossed a line. She didn't. When I brought it up again, calmly this time, I got ambushed in the kitchen. Brenda was already there sipping coffee, and my mom was leaning against the counter like they had rehearsed a script. I started with a simple request. I said I needed my room back, not just for comfort, but for work, for the income that kept me paying bills around here. I reminded her that I paid rent, that I wasn't freeloading, and that I had nowhere else to go. Brenda cut in before my mom even opened her mouth. You're being incredibly selfish, Tyler, she said. like it was the most obvious thing in the world. You're a grown man, and you're having a meltdown because a couple of kids sat at your desk? My jaw clenched. They broke my microphone. They went through my drawers. This isn't about sitting. It's about crossing boundaries. They're kids, my mom added, her tone sharp. You're acting like you live in a hotel. This is a family home. Then maybe start treating me like family. I snapped back. Not a stranger who's paying to be here. That's when things really spiraled. Brenda called me cruel. She said I couldn't possibly understand what her kids were going through, being uprooted like that, forced to live in a strange house. My mom nodded along, as if what Brenda was saying made total sense. She said I needed to learn how to give in sometimes, that the world didn't revolve around me and my equipment. When I asked how long this was supposed to last, Brenda laughed. Until we get back on our feet. You don't just put a timeline on that. It takes as long as it takes. I turned to my mom and said, so you're okay with this? With locking me out of the room I pay for, with them treating my stuff like toys? She crossed her arms. It's my house. I decide what happens in it. The words hit harder than I expected. Not because they were new. I'd heard them before in arguments over dishes or curfews years ago, but because this time they meant something bigger. She wasn't just asserting control. She was drawing a line in the sand. No matter how much I contributed, no matter how much I paid, at the end of the day, I had no say. She followed it up with, the room is a kid's zone now. They need space, and your setup takes up too much of it. You can figure something else out. So what am I supposed to do? I asked, more stunned than angry at that point. Work from the bathroom? You're overreacting, Brenda muttered. You just don't want to share. Share. As if I was hoarding a toy instead of trying to protect the one place in this house that still felt like mine. From that moment on, I wasn't allowed to go into my own room without asking. Brenda made it clear that if I needed anything from the kid zone, I'd have to knock and wait until they weren't using it. I couldn't even grab a hoodie without it turning into a scene. My gear was still there, stuffed into boxes against the far wall, wires coiled like they'd been yanked from the ports in a rush. Every time I walked past the door, I heard cartoons blasting from my monitor or plastic toys knocking against the legs of the desk I built. And every time I tried to reason with my mom, she just repeated the same phrase like a broken record. It's my house, I decide. That was the moment it really sank in. It didn't matter how much I paid, how hard I worked, or how reasonable I tried to be. My place in this house had never been permanent. It had just been tolerated. It didn't take long for everything to start slipping through my fingers. Without access to my studio, my work began to fall apart piece by piece. I tried to stay afloat by working from a corner table at a local coffee shop, but it was a terrible substitute. I couldn't record clean audio with the constant sound of milk steamers going off and conversations buzzing all around me. The internet was spotty, the outlets were always taken, and my back ached from sitting in those flimsy chairs for hours. I pushed through as best I could, but edits that used to take me a day started stretching into 3, sometimes more. Clients began pulling out. A few apologized, said they liked working with me but needed quicker turnarounds. Others ghosted entirely. My Fiverr rating dropped. My calendar started looking emptier with each passing week. At the same time, my mom kept asking for help with bills. Nothing new. I had been covering the bulk of the utilities and rent for a while now, but somehow the numbers were creeping higher. Internet had gone up, then the water bill, then groceries. She never said it directly, but it was obvious that with Brenda and her kids now in the house full-time, I was essentially footing the bill for everyone. Brenda didn't pay a dime. Not for food, not for water, not for electricity. She didn't even chip in for toilet paper. And when I brought it up to my mom, she just said Brenda was going through a lot and I should be more understanding. I bit my tongue for weeks. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight, that I'd get through it, find a way to salvage some projects, maybe get back on my feet once I figured out a new setup. But deep down, I knew I was bleeding out slowly. The savings I'd worked so hard to build for a down payment were shrinking every week. What used to be a growing account was now a lifeline I was clinging to. Eventually, I decided I had to take the equipment out. If I couldn't use the room, fine. But I wasn't going to let my gear sit in there collecting dust while kids used my monitor to watch cartoons and my desk as a snack table. I waited until a Sunday morning when things were quiet, slipped into the room, and started disconnecting my audio interface and second monitor. I didn't even get halfway through before Brenda came charging down the hallway. "What are you doing?" she barked, standing in the doorway like a bouncer. "You can't just barge in here. This is the kids' space." "I'm taking my things," I said calmly. "I need them to work. I'm not asking for permission." She stepped in front of me and crossed her arms. "No, you're not taking anything. The kids need this setup. They've gotten used to it." I laughed, bitter and tired. "They've gotten used to my livelihood? Brenda, none of this belongs to you. You don't pay to live here, and you sure as hell didn't buy any of this equipment." That's when my mom showed up. She must have heard the voices. She looked at the scene, me holding my audio mixer, Brenda blocking the door, and instead of stepping in reasonably, she raised her voice like I was the one causing trouble. Tyler, stop. You're making things worse. Just leave it alone. I couldn't believe it. Mom, I bought this. With my own money. I need this to do my job. Her face twisted like she didn't even recognize me. They need a stable environment. You're being disruptive. And you've been on edge for weeks. Maybe you need a break. That's when Brenda really went off. She started calling me entitled, saying I was a man-child who couldn't stand not getting his way, that I was pathetic for clinging to a few electronics like they were my lifeline. She called me a failure, loud enough for the kids to hear. Said it was no wonder I was still living at home. Then she stepped forward and actually grabbed the mixer from my hands. I didn't fight back, not physically. I was stunned. I felt humiliated, like a guest being thrown out of a party he paid for. I backed out of the room slowly, empty-handed, as Brenda muttered something under her breath about me being unstable and emotionally immature. I went back to the living room, sat on the couch, and stared at the floor for what felt like an hour. The weight in my chest didn't feel like anger anymore. It felt like defeat, like I was being erased in my own home, and no one seemed to care. I waited a few days after the incident in my room before I said anything. Not because I needed time to calm down, I was calm. I was done. I didn't yell, I didn't argue. I just realized something had to change, and that it wasn't going to come from them. Brenda wasn't going anywhere. The kids weren't going to stop treating my gear like toys. My mom had made it clear where her priorities were. I could either keep fighting for scraps in a house I was paying to live in, or I could finally do what I should have done months ago. One evening after dinner, while Brenda and the kids were in the living room watching some loud animated show and my mom was wiping down the counter, I told her directly and without emotion. Either I get my room back, or I'm moving out. I'm not going to argue about it. That's just what it is. She didn't look surprised. She didn't even stop what she was doing. She just shook her head slowly and let out a short laugh. You, she said, like she didn't believe the words coming out of my mouth. You're not going anywhere, Tyler. Let's not pretend. You need this house. You need me. You can't survive out there on your own. Look at you now, barely working, losing clients, falling apart over a bedroom. She didn't say it with anger. She said it with that smug, superior tone she reserved for lectures about responsibility and maturity. Like I was some lost teenager she was indulging, not the person who'd been covering her bills for years. You think some studio setup makes you independent? She continued, still wiping the counter. You'd be crawling back in 2 weeks asking for help. And I won't be there next time. I didn't respond. I didn't argue. I didn't tell her she was wrong or remind her that I'd paid for the lights she was standing under, the food in the fridge, the internet they were using to stream whatever garbage show was playing in the background. I just nodded and left the room. The next morning, I started searching. Not apartments with roommates. I wanted my own place. Nothing big, just something small, quiet, with enough space for a bed, a desk, and the gear I still hadn't managed to reclaim. I found a one-bedroom in an older building about 20 minutes away. The rent was steep, but manageable if I cut back on everything else and took on a few short-term editing contracts I'd been putting off. The landlord was an older guy who liked that I had steady freelance income and didn't ask too many questions. I signed the lease 3 days later. I didn't say anything at home. I moved in silence. Every night after they went to bed, I started packing my things, what little I still had access to. My clothes, my books, my spare monitor. I boxed up cables, hard drives, and everything else they hadn't already shoved into a closet or handed over to the kids. I backed up all my project files, unplugged my laptop, and started preparing to leave. No announcements. No speeches. Just action. I moved out on a Wednesday morning while the house was empty. Brenda had taken the kids to school, and my mom was at her part-time job. I didn't leave a note. I didn't announce it. I didn't make a scene. I just loaded up my car in 3 quiet trips and drove to my new apartment. It was a small unit on the 2nd floor with creaky floors and a view of the parking lot, but it was mine. The silence in there didn't feel heavy or forced like it had at home. It felt clean. I dropped my bags by the door, opened the window for fresh air, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel like I was walking on someone else's terms. That afternoon, I turned off my phone and just sat in that space, finally able to think. When I turned it back on a few hours later, I had 10 missed calls from my mom and 2 from Brenda. Then the texts started pouring in. Where are you? Why is your room empty? You didn't even say goodbye? So that's how you're going to act after everything? I didn't answer any of them. The next day, I checked my bank account out of habit. I was looking to make a budget now that I was fully on my own and needed to make rent without any safety net. As I scrolled through the transactions, I noticed something that stopped me cold. Her phone bill, still on autopay. The electric bill, still set to draft from my account. Brenda's credit card payment, linked through a third-party app I'd used to help my mom when she just needed a bit of help catching up. It hadn't even occurred to me to cancel any of that in the chaos of moving out. I'd set most of those payments up months ago during one of the many times my mom said she was short and needed me to handle it, just until things even out. Only they never did. I started digging through the last few statements and saw the pattern. I had been covering not just my portion, but everyone's. Even Brenda's car insurance had gone through my card once. All this time, they'd been telling me I wasn't pulling my weight, that I was unstable, that I'd never survive without their support. But I was the one keeping the lights on, keeping their phones connected, paying down a debt that wasn't even mine. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the screen. Not angry, not surprised, just tired. I called my bank and shut down every linked payment. Froze the card, requested replacements, changed passwords, locked it all down. Then I called my old internet provider to make sure that account had been closed. It hadn't. I terminated it on the spot. The next morning, I made another call to a lawyer I'd met once through a client who ran a small business and needed video work for legal seminars. I explained the situation as calmly as I could. The misuse of my account, the unauthorized charges, the fact that I'd been funding an entire household without consent or any formal agreement. He listened quietly, then said, "Yeah, we can work with this." And that was it. No dramatics. No phone call to warn her. No final text. Just a quiet pivot in the background while she and Brenda stood in that house, trying to figure out why the lights weren't working, why the phone bill bounced, and why Brenda's minimum payment never processed. They called again, of course. I didn't answer. When I met with the lawyer again a week later, I brought in a thick folder of bank statements, payment histories, and emails I'd printed out over the last few days. I'd spent every evening combing through my records, line by line, looking for anything suspicious. At first, I was just trying to understand how deep it all went. But the deeper I looked, the uglier it got. We were sitting in his office, a quiet space on the second floor of a modest building downtown. I handed him the folder, and he started flipping through the documents. He didn't say much at first, just nodded, occasionally pausing to highlight something or jot down a note in the margin. Then he came across a set of recurring utilities I'd flagged, payments that didn't quite line up with the official billing records I'd pulled directly from the company's websites. "These charges here," I said, pointing to 3 months of inflated power bills. I looked up the actual statements from the electric company's site. The amounts drafted from my account were always about $30 or $40 higher. Every single time. He leaned back, brow furrowed. "Did she send you the bills herself?" "Yeah," I said. "She texted me screenshots every month or forwarded PDFs. I thought it was just easier to keep it that way." He pulled the documents closer and compared the numbers. "She was skimming," he said, tapping his pen on the inflated totals. "Charging you more than the real bill, then pocketing the difference. Not a mistake. Not even subtle. It's deliberate." I felt this slow, heavy realization settle in my chest like concrete. I'd suspected something was off, but having it confirmed like that made my stomach turn. "And this," he continued, flipping to another section. "You said these credit card payments linked to Brenda's card were made from your account?" "Yeah." I had no idea until I saw the third-party app history. He nodded grimly, and then turned to the last few pages. I'd added them at the last minute after finding something strange buried in an old drawer when I was packing, a faded document from years ago, a power of attorney form I signed when I was 19. Back then, I was just starting college and still figuring out how to handle bills. My mom told me it would make things easier if she could help me with payments or banking in case anything ever came up. I didn't think twice. He studied the document carefully, then looked at me. "You realize this is still active," he said. "She could have used it to access your accounts. Legally, if you didn't revoke it, she could get away with all kinds of transfers. But if she used it to make payments on her behalf without telling you, that's a different story. Especially if it was to enrich herself or a third party." I felt myself sinking into the chair. She did. She absolutely did. He closed the folder and set it on the desk with both hands. Then he looked me straight in the eye. "This is financial abuse, Tyler. Plain and simple. She used your income, your trust, and a legal instrument you signed when you were a teenager to take money from you without your knowledge. That's a form of fraud, and we can file a lawsuit." The room felt very still for a moment. "She used you like a piggy bank," he added quietly. "And I'm guessing it wasn't just out of desperation. She saw what you were building and decided it belonged to her too." I didn't say anything. I just nodded. Not because I was shocked, but because I finally understood what had been happening all along. I don't know how she found out, whether someone tipped her off or if she just started putting pieces together after I cut the payments and went silent. But not long after I met with the lawyer and we started preparing the case, everything flipped. My mom went on the offensive, fast and ugly. She started calling relatives, people I hadn't spoken to in months, spinning a story that was so warped I almost couldn't believe she was saying it with a straight face. She told them I had drained her account, that I took money she had saved for emergencies, that I abandoned her and Brenda and threw them out of their own home, which made no sense considering I was the one who left. She framed it as if I had pulled some grand betrayal, like I'd been planning to ruin her life behind her back. Cousins started messaging me, confused, some angry, some just trying to get the other side. An uncle I barely knew left me a voicemail saying I was a disgrace. My mom had clearly spent time working on the narrative before she launched it. And then came Brenda. She took it to social media. I didn't see it firsthand. Someone sent me screenshots. She wrote this long, dramatic post about how she had stayed with a family friend during a hard time, only to discover that he had been emotionally volatile and inappropriate around children. She never used my name directly, but anyone who knew the situation could connect the dots. She even implied that the kids had started showing us signs of trauma after interacting with me. It was disgusting, calculated, and clearly aimed to poison the well before anything official could happen. I didn't respond. Not publicly. Not to the family group chats that were suddenly lit up with messages about how I needed help or how I was lashing out. I didn't take the bait. Instead, I printed every screenshot. I saved every voicemail. I downloaded every email and timestamped every fake accusation and manipulative statement. I logged everything. Dates, times, exact phrasing. Then I walked into the police station. I was calm. I didn't go there looking to cause a scene. I told them what had been happening, handed over the folder, and explained that I was being slandered and harassed after cutting financial ties with my mother and her guest. The officer I spoke with was surprisingly attentive. He looked through the materials, asked a few follow-up questions, and took it seriously. By the end of the visit, I had filed for a temporary protection order. It wasn't about revenge. It was about making space, about protecting myself from the lies, the character attacks, and whatever else they had planned. I wasn't going to let their smear campaign derail everything I'd been working for. I wasn't going to let them define me. The day of the hearing, I sat in that courtroom with my lawyer at my side, watching as my mother and Brenda took their seats across the aisle. I hadn't seen either of them in weeks. My mom looked smaller than I remembered, like all the fire she'd had when she was barking orders around the house had drained out of her. Brenda, on the other hand, looked ready for a performance. She wore too much makeup and had that fake concerned expression she probably practiced in the mirror. Neither of them looked at me. The judge called everything to order, and my lawyer stood up first. He walked the court through the timeline. How I had lived at home while paying rent and utilities. How I had built a studio from scratch to support myself. How I had unknowingly covered not just my mother's bills, but Brenda's too, through a mixture of automatic drafts and a power of attorney that had been left in place long past its purpose. He presented every document. Bank statements that showed inflated charges side by side with actual bills from utility companies. Transfers to Brenda's accounts disguised as shared payments. Screenshots of texts and emails where my mother had sent doctored numbers. Printouts from the social media post Brenda made, along with statements from a few friends who had reached out in confusion after seeing it. There were even short clips from the home security cameras I had helped install 2 years earlier, showing Brenda's kids tearing through my room and tossing around my equipment while she and my mother stood in the hallway laughing about it. Then came the witnesses. The neighbor who confirmed I was always the one taking out the trash, shoveling the walkway, and coming home late after coffee shop work sessions. Another neighbor who said he'd seen Brenda screaming at her kids outside on multiple occasions while I quietly brought in groceries alone. People who didn't know me anything, who had no reason to lie, standing up to say I wasn't the villain they had tried to paint me as. When it was their turn, my mother tried to play the concerned parent. She said I had become distant, aggressive, and unreliable, that she was just trying to hold the house together while I was drifting. Brenda backed her up, claiming that she and her children had been made to feel unsafe, that I had created a toxic environment, that I was unstable. But they had nothing to back it up. No emails, no reports, no footage, no formal complaints, nothing. The judge cut them off twice when they started veering off into vague emotional claims. At one point, when they were asked about the absence of any rental agreement, receipts, or written consent for financial use, the judge set down his pen and stared at them for a long moment. "So you're telling me," he said, his voice low and sharp, "that you had this man paying your bills, covering your friend's debt, and funding your household without a single written agreement or acknowledgement. And now you want the court to believe this was his idea?" Neither of them said a word. He leaned back and tapped the folder in front of him. "You used your son as an ATM. That's not just irresponsible. That's exploitation. Frankly, I'm disgusted." My lawyer stood up and laid out our claim. Compensation for the damage to my studio equipment based on purchase receipts and repair estimates. Reimbursement for the money withdrawn under false pretenses. and damages for the defamation and invasion of privacy caused by the social media smear campaign, which had nearly cost me my remaining freelance clients. We also asked for compensation for emotional distress and financial abuse stemming from the misuse of the power of attorney, which had allowed my mother to siphon money from my account long after I was capable of managing my own finances. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. The paper trail spoke louder than anything I could have said. When the judge asked if I had anything to add, I told him calmly that I didn't want to destroy anyone. I just wanted my life back. What they took wasn't just money or gear. It was security, privacy, and years of work that they treated like it was disposable. He nodded, scribbled something in his notebook, and said he would issue a ruling within the next few days. I walked out of the courtroom without looking back. The ruling came in 3 days later. My lawyer called me first thing in the morning, right as I was pouring coffee into a chipped mug I'd brought from the old house, the last of a set I had paid for but never really used. He didn't try to build it up. He just set it straight. We won. The court awarded compensation in the amount of $18,400, plus full coverage of all legal fees. The judge cited financial abuse, unauthorized use of a power of attorney, defamation, and deliberate destruction of property. He also issued a formal injunction prohibiting my mother from using my name in any financial or legal documents, current or future, under threat of penalty. There was no more hiding behind family ties or excuses. The judgment was clear. What they did was theft. Brenda was ordered to vacate the house within 2 weeks. She didn't say a word in court when it was read, just sat there with her mouth tight and her eyes on the floor. My mother, on the other hand, had to sign a written acknowledgement of the debt, which would be submitted to the court record and used as the basis for any further collection efforts if she failed to pay. She didn't cry. She didn't argue. She just signed the paper, as if the ink weighed 100 pounds. After the verdict, the silence broke. Slowly at first, then like a flood. Relatives who had called me names and cut me off started reaching out. One cousin sent me a long message saying he was sorry for not believing me and just didn't know what to think at the time. An aunt who hadn't spoken to me in over a year left a voicemail full of hesitant, stumbling words about how family stuff can get complicated. Even my uncle, the one who once left a voicemail calling me a disgrace, sent a half-hearted text saying he hoped we could move forward. I didn't reply to any of them. Not because I was angry, not even because I wanted revenge. I just didn't need them anymore. They weren't there when I was sleeping on a couch in silence, watching years of work fall apart. They weren't there when I found out the people I trusted had been slowly draining me dry. Their apologies didn't carry weight now that a courtroom forced the truth into the open. I had already moved forward. They were just catching up. I spent the next few weeks rebuilding everything from the ground up. My new apartment, while nothing fancy, became a clean slate. I started with the essentials: desk, monitor arm, keyboard, the same kind of soundproof panels I used to have, only this time placed exactly where I wanted them. I bought a replacement for the microphone Brenda's kids had broken. Same model, fresh out of the box, and when I set it up on the boom arm, there was this quiet sense of relief, like breathing normally for the first time in a long time. At first, I didn't plan to share any of it publicly. I just wanted to move on quietly. But one night, after unpacking the last box, I sat at the desk and hit record. I didn't rehearse it. I just told the story the way it happened, how I was used, how I stayed quiet too long, how I finally walked out. I posted the video to TikTok and later shared a written version on Reddit. I didn't expect much, maybe a few comments, maybe a handful of people who could relate. Instead, it exploded. People messaged me with their own stories. Strangers left comments saying they were proud of me, that they had been through similar things but never had the nerve to walk away. One company reached out and offered me a small sponsorship deal for my content, saying they respected how I handled myself under pressure. It wasn't massive money, but it was enough to remind me that I could stand on my own. For the first time in years, I had full control over my finances. No shared accounts. No surprise charges. I checked my bank statements now and saw only my name. Every dollar I made came from my work, and every dollar I spent went to something I chose. No more quiet deductions in the background. No more pretending that helping wasn't slowly becoming exploitation. As for my family, I didn't cut off every single person, but I drew clear lines. I spoke when I wanted to. I responded when I felt like it. I made it clear that trust was not automatic. It had to be earned. I'm not bitter. I'm not angry anymore. But I'm not naive either. Being kind does not mean allowing neglect. Being a family does not mean being a victim. Thanks for sticking with me to the end. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to walk away from people you thought would always have your back? I'd really like to hear your take.